In this video, I'm going to be painting up this starter set for Victory at Sea. This is called the Battle of the Pacific, and here are the Japanese ships, including this bonus one that I got from Warlord Games. And here is the American side of the box. I will be building and painting up this entire set all at once, and I'll show you how to do it, so that you can get them all ready for the tabletop in no time. With all resin miniatures, you'll want to wash them first. Use dish soap and hot water, and then dunk all your miniatures into the container. Let them soak for about half an hour to an hour. After that, you'll want to rinse off all the parts in running water and then lay them out to dry overnight. For instructions on how to build these ships, you'll want to look at the last page of the rulebook that came with the set. I won't cover every step of how to build, but I will provide you with some tips. The first thing you will need is a good pair of hobby clippers. Then you'll want some super glue, because that's the only thing that really works with resin, and a very sharp hobby knife. Now these resin ships come pretty raw. There are some flash and also some sprue leftover marks that you will have to cut off with your hobby knife. There's also flashing on some of the models like this. You want to gently remove it, because they will get in the way of painting if you do not. The guns, cranes, and superstructure will come in sprues such as this. This is where a good pair of clippers comes in. Ones that are made specifically for hobbying will cleanly cut out parts from a sprue and not damage them. Be especially careful with the smaller parts such as antennas and cranes. Those will break easily. Now, using a very sharp knife, you can get rid of flashing like I'm showing here. There will be quite a bit on these small parts. The advantage of having a very sharp knife is that you will have to use very little effort when you're trying to clean small stuff such as this antenna. It will clean it much easier without damaging the part. On the ends of the guns, there will be sprue left over that you'll have to cut off like this. Just simply snip them off and the gun should look fairly clean afterwards. To attach the tiny bits onto the hulls, you'll want to use super glue. Follow the instructions on the rulebook and make sure to read twice and attach once, because once these things set, they're not going to come off. As the glue is drying, you can face the guns in different directions just to give your ships a little bit of character. The next step is optional. I will be magnetizing these ships. And you may ask, why am I doing this? Well, there's a good reason, and I'll show you in a little bit. I will be using 10 by 2 mm round magnets that you can get from Amazon. And I will be drilling holes into the bases of the ships with a 7/16 drill bit and a power tool. I will carefully drill a 2 mm deep hole in the middle of the base like this. Be careful to get rid of the shavings after you're done, as those are not very healthy for you. Dry fit the magnet in the hole to make sure it sits flush. Then apply some super glue into the hole and then slide the magnet in place after that. Magnetizing these ships allows you to store it in storage containers with steel bottoms. And I'll show you how to build one of these carry cases in the video in the upper right hand corner. Now, I don't usually use a painting handle for my projects, but in this particular case, because you need access all the way around the base, I recommend using something like this. I basically use something like a spare travel bottle and I super glue a washer on top of it. To make this bottle more stable, just fill it with some water so it can stand on its own, and then after that you can just swap ships on and off of it as you go. The first thing you'll want to do is prime all your models white, and you can do this with an aerosol primer such as this one from Tamiya, or you can use a primer out of an airbrush, which I like to do. With either method, you'll want to have coverage all the way around all of the models. For this tutorial, you'll only need 6 colors. Magic Blue Speed Paint, followed by Warlord Gray, and then Holy White, which is also a speed paint. The only acrylic I use is matte white, and for the decks I use Sand Golem as well as Palette Bone. I start out with Magic Blue Speed Paint, and with a fairly broad brush I am going to paint the entire base in this color, making sure to not bleed onto the ships. Now the method I'm going to prescribe will paint the entire base in this color, and I will not be painting the rim like how Warlord Games does here in a dark blue. I feel that the dark blue rims really make the ships look very jarring and not part of the water that you would see on the playmat or the fold-out play sheets that came with the starter set. Painting the entire base magic blue allows the entire thing to look as if it's water, and I feel that's a lot more natural. For the United States Navy, I'm going to use one of their earlier measures, which is a dark gray along the hull and then a light gray up on top. The American ships also had teak wood-paneled decks. The early measures for the Imperial Japanese Navy were basically dark gray all over. I decided to paint the IJN ship decks in Japanese cypress, which is a slightly lighter brown color. To start painting the ships, I use Warlord Gray speed paint. This goes on the hulls of any of the American or Japanese ships. For the American ships, I only apply this color onto the hull and not onto the upper structures or the guns. For the Imperial Japanese Navy ships, I also apply this Warlord Gray color onto the top deck areas as well. And what I do is I just paint the entire thing. I don't worry about any of the decks or anything. I will show you how to paint those later in brown. For the upper parts of the American ships, I will be combining 3 parts Warlord Gray with 2 parts Holy White. If you mix them together really good, it will give you a slightly lighter tinge of gray, and this works really well on the American ships. Again, you want to just generously apply it all over the tops of the American ships because you will want full coverage. Don't worry about the decks or the lifeboats for now, just paint everything gray. If you want the hulls of the American ships to look darker, go ahead and apply a second coat of Warlord Gray. Here you can see the difference between the American ships and the Japanese ships. The Japanese ships will look a little bit darker and the American ships will have a lighter top. Next, I use matte white acrylic paint, and using a sharp-tipped medium brush, I apply this white paint onto all the deck areas on all of the ships. I also put this white onto any of the lifeboats that I come across for either the Japanese or American ships. This is a step that you want to be a little bit careful on to make sure that you don't overpaint onto any of the upper structure, the hull, or anything that you don't want to end up white or brown later on. For the decks of the American ships, I use Sand Golem Speed Paint. This is a bright and vibrant brown, which looks really good on the American ships, simulating the teak decks that they used to have. Painting all the American ships this deck color allows you to quickly identify them on the table and tell whether you're looking at an American ship or a Japanese one. As you see here, I put the brown right on top of the white surfaces that I painted earlier. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, I depicted them with Japanese cypress decks, which tend to be a lighter shade of brown, and for this I use Palette Bone Speed Paint. This lighter shade of brown also contrasts really well against the dark gray of the Japanese ships. For either faction, I make sure to not paint the lifeboats. I want to keep those white. For the water effects, I'm going to switch back to matte white acrylic paint. With a medium-sized detailing brush, paint the perimeter of all the ships all the way around in white. After this step, place your brush on a flat angle. Now with the white paint, apply it with a glancing blow of the brush against the waves on the model. You'll want to only paint the waves that are on the sides and the back of the ship. You'll want to keep the front of it blue. Using the same flat brush method, you'll want to carefully feather on the white onto the letters of the ship like this. There are letters on the left hand and on the right hand sides of the base, and if you're careful, you will be able to transfer the white onto the letters without getting into the recesses. You will want to be fairly gentle with this, so don't be surprised if you have to go back for a second or third coat to get the white to show up nice and bright. If you made any mistakes or overpainted, use some magic blue speed paint and just kind of gently correct those mistakes. Now go ahead and repeat this process for all the ships for both sides. If you paint everything in a huge batch paint like I'm doing here, you'll be able to paint up the entire box in just one evening. Now, the trailing wake of the ship is going to be the one that's most pronounced, so using a broad brush, lightly apply the white onto the rear of the ship to make it look like a trail. You want to use fairly gentle strokes so you don't make it too white, keep some of the blue showing. At this point, you're basically done. Now the last step you want to do is just go back through all your ships and just catch mistakes. Anything that is overpainted, underpainted, you missed a few spots. Use the paint that you have in your palette and just go ahead and touch it up as you go. After that, protect your work by spraying on 2 layers of matte varnish. A good storage and carry option for this starter set is the stack and carry from Sterilite. You can put all your various pieces, your cards, your rulebook, and so on the top deck. And then at the bottom, if you put a dollar store baking pan, like I showed in my DIY carrying case video, you're able to put your magnetized ships in there and carry them safely from game session to game session. Here are some 360-degree views of some of the completed ships. This starter set was honestly really fun to paint. Don't shy away from batch painting them like I did. You will allow yourself to play these miniatures fully painted a lot sooner than you think. I hope this video was helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Until then, happy gaming and happy hobbying.